Fanatec have recently released their latest in their wheelbase lineup, the Clubsport range, slotting in between the CSL DD and the DD1 and DD2. These products are designed to fill the gap in the current Fanatec lineup and go against some of the other manufacturers who have products in this segment. I have been testing the Clubsport DD for a little while now, and this review will be a look at the product and how it feels in various different titles. To make this easier for you to go through the review and pick out the bits you want, I have set up chapters for each section, so take a look at the timeline and click on the parts that you are most interested in, though I do recommend watching through the entire video for my complete opinions. With that said, what do I think of the Clubsport DD? I ordered the Clubsport DD after cancelling my initial pre-order of the Clubsport DD Plus, realising that I've misunderstood the torque figures. So, with regards to the majority of the direct drive wheelbases on the market, the torque figure that is supplied is a peak value, that is the maximum output of the base. This is true of all previous offerings from Fanatec, including the CSL DD and the GT DD Pro, which were offered at 5 or 8 Nm peak with the boost kit 180. The Clubsport DD and DD Plus are not marketed in the same way. Instead of peak torque, Fanatec have supplied a holding torque figure. That is the torque value that a wheelbase will be able to sustain for an extended period of time without any drop in strength. This is something that Fanatec appear to be quite proud of. And this is what caught me out on the initial pre-order. The Clubsport DD offers 12 Nm of holding torque, with the DD Plus adding an extra 3 Nm of holding torque to that, plus PlayStation compatibility. Now for me, having been just about used to 8 Nm of torque, knowing that the peak torque of these two would end up being a few Nm higher than the holding value, it made less sense to pay an extra €200 or thereabouts for the DD Plus. Especially as I was not making much use of the GT DD Pro on PlayStation anyway, I was only plugging it in occasionally for Gran Turismo 7. So, just bear in mind that the 12 Nm Clubsport DD is on par with competitors that are stating higher torque figures, closer to that of perhaps the Moza R16 or the Simicube Sport 2. The former is probably about the same, with the latter being a little bit more powerful, maybe 10-15% or so. The Logitech DD offering, though 11 Nm of torque, is not comparable in my opinion, in terms of torque at least, because that is a peak value, and in reality, the Clubsport DD is some 40% more powerful at peak values. However, I will say that I am very much approximating these peak values because, well, there is no real value stated, and I might be a little bit off. It could be a little bit more powerful or a little less. Both the Clubsport DD and Clubsport DD Plus are the exact same size, measuring 205mm in length or depth, 250mm with the stem, and with the face being 160mm wide by 170mm high. That makes it somewhat bigger than the CSL DD in depth, but the width and height remain exactly the same as before. Also, it has a mass of around 9 kilograms, so do take a little care when you are mounting this. Connectors on both are also the same, with a USB Type-C to Type-A for connecting to a PC. This time USB 3 is the recommended minimum, unlike previously where when I plugged my CSL DD into a USB 3 port it did not work. There is a standard 4-pin Molex connector for the power, which is connected to a 340 watt power supply, and 4 RJ12 connectors for 2 shifters, shifter 2 being sequential only, a handbrake and pedals. There is also a CAN bus port, but I have no idea what that could be used for in this instance. Mounting points are available on the side and bottom with rails and T-nuts. If you have a rig that has underside mounting points for other Fanatec products, this will fit right in. I do recommend having a solid rig though, and I'm not sure if attempting to table mount this in any way would be a good idea. If you do so, ensure your table legs are extremely solid, but I highly recommend you do not do that. The Clubsport DD and DD Plus both come with QR2 as standard, so you will be getting the latest in Fanatec connector hardware with the product out of the box, though I believe you can downgrade to QR1 if you really want to do so, but again, I do not recommend that. Speaking of QR2, Since my old system was QR1, I had to purchase some QR2 wheelside connectors. So I decided to go for the standard ones, upgrading the standard QR1 on my Clubsport RS wheel and the QR1 Lite on the McLaren GT3 V2 wheel. I will say that the QR2 upgrade is a little expensive, but the quality of the kit is absolutely fantastic. Every single issue I ever found with the QR1, from the more finicky way of connecting it and risking pinching your fingers, to the somewhat wobbly stem and the flex in the QR1 connectors themselves, is gone. Replacing that is a solid setup which connects with a simple push, disconnects easily, and is free from any flex or wobble that I can determine. This is something that I think is vital at higher torque values, as you will find yourself wrestling with the car a little bit more, and will potentially feel more movement than you would want that is a result of the connectors and stem as opposed to the actual force feedback. In fact, I would go insofar as to say that because of the QR2 upgrade, some of the finer details of feedback are more readily felt in the wheel because it's not being muddied by any component. If you do want more information about the QR2 system and how it compares, I do recommend checking out Boosted Media's video on that, which explains the differences extremely well. Now, one aspect about the QR2 system, at least on this particular base that I was concerned about, was when I looked at the base side connector, so the stem itself, and it was really short, and I was concerned at how short that stem was. However, having tried it out, I find no problems with it whatsoever, including with gloves on. Not once did I find myself hitting the base itself in any which way, so Fanatec have clearly done their homework on that. My hands are on the small side though, so it may be an issue if you have very large hands. Just be aware of that too. Getting the Clubsport DD working and updated was a much easier affair than my initial experience with Fanatec. If you're coming from previous Fanatec base, be sure to upgrade to the latest PC driver, else your base will not work correctly. Once you've done that, there is an update to the firmware, which worked first time for me, followed by a calibration for both my wheels. Now, compared to the initial problems I had with the CSL DD, particularly with my McLaren wheel and the shifter, this was simple and how it should be. Whether I was just unfortunate with the CSL DD or not, I have no idea, but this was definitely easier. As with the CSL DD, I had 5 onboard settings for the wheelbase, of which I started by setting the first in advanced mode to nearly match that of my CSL DD. As I went through testing the different titles, I adjusted the values to eventually arrive at the ones that you see on screen right now. Now, these are by no means perfect and will most likely be changed a little bit as time goes on. From here on in, I will be running through a few titles that I've played or have played before, quickly going through how the base felt in each one and whether the extra torque of the CSL DD is worth it if that is your main or only title. Now, these are just opinions of course, so please do not take anything as hard fact. What I feel and prefer may be different to what you prefer. For those of you looking to see a FullForce segment, I'm afraid that I do not have any title at present that supports it. In fact, at the time of this review being recorded, I'm not sure if any title supports it full stop, but as far as I can tell, the idea behind FullForce is a new technology that makes the most of direct drive technology for instant feedback response using a new force feedback protocol instead of direct input. Now in this case, it is meant to be able to create vibrations at high frequency that will simulate things such as engine RPM or road surface textures, which the current force feedback protocols just cannot do because they are designed for belt and gear driven bases. It sounds similar to Logitech's TrueForce, which does a similar job with higher frequency force feedback. However, since I have no title that supports it, I cannot really give you any feedback on it. Fanatec have an SDK that is being going out to developers, I believe, for them to implement the force feedback protocol into their titles, but who knows when that will happen. From a feature standpoint though, I think it is a nice idea. Like TrueForce, it is a system that in the future is probably going to be the way force feedback is handled. Right now, the most use I can see of it maybe is going to be an improvement in fidelity for road feel, but whether that is going to improve your lap times is going to be debatable. I will only be able to test that when it is out. Now, across all the titles that I tested, the standout factor was the greater dynamic range, and with that, the greater fidelity and depth of feedback. Everything felt a little bit more nuanced, precise, refined, compared to the CSL DD that I had been using. And it was more than just strength that had changed. I'm not exactly sure how Fanatec have done this, but I have a feeling that it is a combination of both the QR2 systems, which is ensuring that none of the small details are lost to the shaft or connectors, coupled with this faster response time of the force feedback itself. It made it extremely easy to catch slides. Well, I say extremely easy, easier to catch slides and know exactly what the car was doing very quickly, which is something that I found the CSL DD did not quite have. It was there, and it was a massive improvement over the Logitech G27 I had, but this was just that little bit more precise, that little bit more responsive. In Assetto Corsa, which is my go-to simulator, I started with the same in-game settings as the CSL DD before jumping into a road car. I found that the cars felt a little bit too heavy, so I reduced the FFB gain in the game by about 10%. That made it a lot better in terms of overall force, without really reducing any of the fidelity and depth of the forces that I could feel. Getting cars to have the back stepping out was a little bit more natural than before, which for me is important. Whilst I can manage to drive cars relatively quickly, I've always had a tendency to want feedback that is as communicative and detailed as possible, so that I can respond to changes near the edge of the limit in the most natural way possible. Again, the CSL DD did have this, but this was just that little bit better. Racing cars, such as the MX-5 Cup car, were also more engaging to drive, with the stiffer suspension meaning I could feel the road effects a little bit better and feel the rumble strips and the curbing a little better. Coming off the top of the hill at Brands Hatch, for example, showed off the increased dynamic range, with the suspension unloading and that unloading being felt nicely through the wheel, and then the compression at the bottom of the hill once again loading up the wheel, giving the feeling of the suspension actually compressing. Swapping to the smaller McLaren GT3 wheel was when I really started feeling some of the smaller details that were now being transmitted in a way that I could interpret through the base. As that wheel is 300mm compared to 320mm that I normally use outside of racing cars, the forces that I could feel were stronger at the same output force from the base. This is just a matter of physics and how torque works. So the 300mm one provided about 7% more than the 320mm at equal torque. If you have a smaller wheel, you will feel a step up compared to what I could feel. Back to what I was feeling, there were some more minute differences between the CSL DD and the Clubsport DD, with some details being more subtle and others more pronounced. This in parts from the increased dynamic range. There was also an excellent feeling of weight transfer as I rode up on the curb or drove a highly cambered corner, though I would say it was no better than the already excellent representation of the CSL DD, just stronger. F1 cars though were a completely different experience, because at the peak torque I could feel it actually being more of a physical challenge, to the point where I was trying to get the car pointing in a specific direction in a high-speed corner, but occasionally starting to struggle physically. Now this is something I've never felt before, and it was quite impressive. There was a little bit of clipping, but some minor adjustments of the force feedback gain in-game sorted that out pretty effectively. I was definitely caught out at first with the sudden loading to maximum torque in milliseconds, and it was a small shock to my arms. It took a few laps to start getting used to that. Now I've not driven in Assetto Corsa Competizione for a while, but as soon as I started driving in that, it felt quite engaging and realistic. The understeer effect did feel a little stronger than I would have liked, but the rest of the feedback was useful, and it was really helping me find the limits of the car. Driving at Bathurst was quite an experience, with the walls being right up against the edge of the track, meaning the feeling of the curbs was vital as you were climbing the hill, knowing when you were going to be pretty much as close as you could get. But I would say that even more importantly was the feeling of weight transfer and grip and understeer as I was driving down the hill, enabling me to judge just how much I could throw the car around. Now, it being my first time at the track in ACC, I could not take full advantage of the information I was receiving, but I was building confidence in each lap, pushing a little harder and feeling the tyres scrub when I got the transitions wrong. In general, force feedback in ACC is excellent, and this wheelbase just exemplified that. In my opinion, this is probably the ideal wheelbase, or the ideal range for wheelbases for Assetto Corsa Competizione. Though I would not say that the higher torque that it offers over maybe 8 to 11 is an absolute must. It does give you a very realistic feel though, apart from, as I said, the understeer that felt just a little bit off, but I think I have always found the understeer in Assetto Corsa Competizione slightly off. Informative, but not quite right. FullForce would have been interesting in this, maybe giving you vibrations of the road texture, or maybe even the engine. It would have been interesting, but we will have to wait and see. Now, titles such as Euro Truck Simulator 2 are not exactly premier titles when it comes to force feedback, fidelity or representation, but it still has a decent model for what it is. And the player base for this title is quite vast. I also record videos for it, so I will be using the Clubsport DD for it. FullForce would be an excellent addition to this title though, because the engine vibration is something that is already simulated and adjusted through the settings, but for now we just have to make do with what we have. The setting for this was far simpler than the other titles because it is a simpler model, simpler physics model, simpler feedback model. Nevertheless, some tweaking was required, but I had the wheelbase doing exactly what I wanted, with all the feedback working exactly as I wanted it to be, with the subtle gravel effects or the chatter of understeer, and nothing being too overwhelming. But I did have to drop the settings for the effects quite a bit for the title. Overall feedback remained at 100, but honestly, I think that this particular wheelbase does not add anything to Euro Truck Simulator 2. So if you are the kind of person who wants to look at this sort of wheelbase for an arcade game or ETS2, I would say that you may be better off going for a cheaper direct drive wheel, such as maybe the CSL DD, Motor R5 or the R9, which I think is more than enough for it in my opinion. In fact, I think the ideal spot might be the Logitech DD offering, because that gives you that little bit of extra torque in case you want to move up to different titles. This is maybe a little too much. Now I thought I would also show you a little bit of trying out a rally title, so I jumped into Dirt Rally 2.0 for the first time in a very long time and set up the wheel for that. Now I know that the tarmac physics in this title are poor, so I've kept my testing limited to gravel and snow, and poor driving. Force feedback here is an interesting subject because you want to be able to change wheel direction very quickly, maybe several times in a second, and you really do not want your force feedback getting in the way or feeling too heavy. I was concerned that at maximum gain it was going to be too strong, but I decided to test it anyway. Once I had set up the in-game settings to be similar to that of the DD1 on the Fanatec forums, I managed to find a decent-ish setup. I think some tweaking is still required, but it was enough for me to test it. I was not able to get the most out of the wheel though with the maximum feedback. The detail and feedback that I was getting was very good. I could feel the car as I jumped, slipped, skidded and skipped across the gravel or snow, and I felt the wheel pulling when I got stuck in a rut or at the side of the road. So if a rally title is in your mix of titles that you play, then this wheel does work fairly well, but again, if you're solely playing Dirt Rally or WRC, this might still be a little bit too much for what you need. Now, I'm not going to say that you should not buy this, because whilst these titles cannot extract the maximum out of it, the dynamic range that was available to me to differentiate between the different sensations really did help, at least a little bit. A 5 to 10 Newton meter base would still be enough, but I think this is not a total waste. The one factor that I do have to point out is the speed at which I was getting the feedback, the response rate, which I will talk a little bit about in a minute. It really did help me in being able to feel where the car was, what it was doing, and what the ground felt like underneath extremely quickly. This is not something that I've felt quite as well before. Now, I'm sure there are plenty more games that I could test out, but I think these four are a good general representation of various types: arcade, driving a lorry, going to a road car, 2 full-on racing cars in various disciplines, plus I do not actually have that many simulators or racing titles to really test out, so it would end up being a really expensive review. During all of my testing, the Clubsport DD temperatures remained low no matter what I threw at it. Even after 3-hour sessions, the wheelbase felt slightly cooler than ambient, which it is winter in the United Kingdom, so it was about 19 degrees Celsius or 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Whilst maintaining these low temperatures, at no point did I feel like the base was dropping off in torque, which is excellent for those of you who want to run endurance racing. I cannot say for certain though whether it would drop off after 6 hours of constant use, but I highly doubt it. I would expect it to get a little bit warmer though. Now before my conclusions, I just want to have a little bit of a chat about the slew rates and this response curve that Fanatec have stated. Now this response graph is impossible to really be tested and proved. We just have to take Fanatec's word for it, but what I can say is that the response of this wheelbase is excellent. During my first impressions live stream, I could definitely feel a difference in the way everything was responding. But there is just no way for me to say that this is better than any competitor, or even tell you exactly what that waveform of that response should be. In fact, the only way for me to describe this is to talk about it in more arbitrary terms. So I could describe it as some sort of output lag. It will be noticeable at the limits of force feedback changes. So when you clip an F1 car, maybe if you clip a curb, then you'll be able to receive that information slightly quicker than I had previously. Similarly, maybe when I was sliding a car. So when I was sliding a Ferrari, I could feel that information just a little bit faster and respond to it a little bit better than I had been able to do it previously. And I think that this does have the ability to improve your lap times when driving at the limit. You may find the wheel lose and then gain traction a little bit faster than you would before, possibly stopping you from manipulating the controls in a way that would make the situation worse. But I can only talk about this arbitrarily, and I cannot be certain about that, nor can I compare it to any other wheelbase in this segment. To sum the Clubsport DD and I suppose the DD Plus up, I would say that this is an excellent product at a very good price point that fits in the zone where the majority of sim racers would like their force feedback to be. It is not a game changer though, like the CSL DD was, and it does not bring any sort of wow factor to the market, though FullForce may yet do something to start changing my opinion of that. What it does do though is provide another high quality offering for consumers to consider with precision engineering, great feedback, an excellent though overdue quick release system, and more competition to ensure that driving simulation hardware prices stay low or lower while the quality remains high regardless of manufacturer. As a product, I can recommend it on the basis of it being extremely well built and a great experience, but I cannot really recommend this over other competitors in class because, well, I have not actually tested those other bases. But one factor that I would take into account is the Fanatec ecosystem, with all those different wheels and peripheral options that are available. Personally, if it was not for the fact that I was able to recoup the majority of the cost for this particular wheelbase by selling my CSL GT DD Pro kit, I would have most likely not purchased it. I was content with the 8 Nm of the CSL DD for most situations, but having now tried it, I would probably tell my past self that it might be worth considering looking at. Of course, the competition has also ramped up since the CSL DD first came out, so there are other choices to consider. But if you find yourself wanting more torque and are already in the Fanatec ecosystem, then this is a really good buy. If you're going to make use of the PlayStation compatibility, then I suppose the DD Plus is also worth it, else I think the extra 3 Nm might not be worth the cost alone. And if you're new to the world of direct drive wheels and you want something that will be suitable for pretty much anything, then again, this is a wheelbase to consider, taking into account the whole Fanatec ecosystem again. But bear in mind the difference between the holding torque figures of the Clubsport range compared to the peak torque of most other direct drive bases when you're shopping around. It is really easy to end up being confused by those. For me, this is pretty much all I would ever need. I thought that this would be the right range for me years ago, and this product reinforces that thought. Would I want the extra overhead for F1 cars? For realism, possibly, but in reality, I'm sitting on a chair and looking at a computer screen. I think there are far better ways for me to increase the realism and immersion of my sim racing for the cost of those extra 3 Nm of torque. Now, if that was available without the PlayStation compatibility cost, then possibly I may have been inclined to go for it, but for now, this is absolutely perfect. In any case, if I did want to step up to a higher level, I would be looking at 20-25 Newton meters of holding torque as opposed to 15. Not that I ever think I will get to that, and I'm fairly certain my rig would not be able to handle it because it's already starting to struggle. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please do click on the like button, subscribe to the channel with the notification bell, and feel free to leave comments with your questions and opinions. I will try to do my best to read each one and answer every single one. Also, do check out the description box for links to my Patreon, social media, and Discord. Thank you very much for watching once again, and goodbye.